we have with us today Kevin Cassidy, who's Chief Executive Officer of the U.S. Rare Earths Company, which is a mineral exploration, mining, and claims acquisition company based in Plano, Texas. Also, Kevin is the managing member and founder of Logic International Consulting Group, which is a consulting group that specializes in the development of global trading businesses.
Well, thank you for attending. 2 points. This is critical to us in the panel and should be very important to you all, so I'm glad you're attending. All right. My name's Kevin Cassidy. There's a lens we look through, and we're a little bit late to the party, but there's a lens we look through when we acquired the properties we acquired. So U.S. Rare Earths is a consolidation of about 22,000 acres spread across Colorado, Montana, and Idaho. And you'll remember from your history books, the Lemhi Pass. That's how Lewis and Clark got to the West Coast, and that passageway represents a compression of two continental plates that result in rare earths. Now, rare earths are rare, but they're really rare in concentration, so they're everywhere. But in concentration suitable for mining, it's very rare. The lens we look through, and I think the optics you should consider, is when you look at these properties, you should look for the economic drivers, and that's, my background's Wall Street. So what we look for is resulting economics. And as Brian said, the criticals and heavy rare earths are the economic drivers that will pull the train. We're headquartered in Texas for all the obvious reasons. Our properties do represent a location where there's infrastructure. There's a mining-friendly environment, and we'll get into this a little bit in a minute. But it's not only important to have these properties in the continental United States for all the recourse purposes, legal system, but having them where there's infrastructure in place is just good circumstance on the part of geology. You can take a look who's on our board. I skipped quickly to that slide, but none of us have to do this for a living. So we are consolidating our efforts into a institutional style build of a business. And I think the junior mining companies in particular have challenges that they otherwise haven't solved for, that we've had to solve for. So General Tommy Franks has come on the board, Senator Bob Carey, Mark Crandall, who runs some of the biggest commodity businesses in the world, now owns the largest alternative energy producing business in Central Europe. My partner, Vic Lattimore, who owned the largest material handling business in the United States. So you can see we know how to move rock, we know how to interact with Washington, we know how to interact with the military, and some people will accuse me of being able to finance things. Take a look at the rocks, though. Hardened rock, you basically have an exercise of grinding rock down. Once it's ground down, there's a whole nother journey. So this is truly a triathlon, not a marathon. And I think the, let's say, frustration on the part of Wall Street, and certainly investors, is that the amount of time it's taken just to get the exploration done is probably a lot longer than people anticipated. And we don't have the IP. Although the IP began here, ended up in other locations, we need to reinvent it back here in the United States. We need to have a supply chain solution to an otherwise production problem. So, to complement Brian's point, we all know where the largest deposit is, China, and basically where the current world supply comes from. So if you talk about a supply chain solution, you have to have inventory. Right? The first step is having a reliable and reasonable high-quality infrastructure and supply chain, meaning material. In the United States, there's virtually no production currently of critical rare earths. And lastly, when you think about the cell phone, perfect point. Cell phone has a magnet in it, a bunch of things in it. But one of the things it has is these magnets, and that's why you have a little speakerphone that's quite loud out of a small cell phone. That capacity needs to be not only invented here or reinvented here, it needs to be brought online. We need that capability here, not just for cell phones. And I understand cell phones are the portal to the internet, right? People think, when you say cell phone, people interpret that to mean I gotta make phone calls. No, if you take a look at the way commerce is going, people buy everything through the cell phones. They interact through the cell phones. So if that's not the case now, it's certainly going to be the case in 5 years. And think about your own lives. Turn that cell phone off for a day. See if you can live with it live without it for one day. Wouldn't happen. All right, so right now there's about 130 tons of rare earths produced a year. The Chinese use themselves, because they make most of the cell phones, right? They're the back office of the world. 100,000 tons. That means 30,000 tons is only what's being exported. It's $4 billion of economics. That's basically what they trade for. But they are responsible, and the economic drive is behind $7 trillion worth of finished goods. Now, in a day when $7 trillion was real money, that's real money. Brian and I coincided on the slide, but what I was doing here was two things. One, confirming that in general, as it's recognized, 91% of the rare earths produced today come out of China. But the important piece is the indirect pieces, right? So the rest of the rare earths are still coming out of China, but they come to us through France, they come to us through China, through Japan. In the end, it's all coming out of China, or just about all of it's coming out of China. Now, how do you run a military if we're going to import the critical rare earths that go into these strike fighters and stuff? And what, we're going to redeliver the rare earths back to them at the tip of a missile? So this just broadly give you a sense of what the business is, what they're used for, how China has really, in a very clever way, figured out a complete supply chain solution. So they basically inherit all the manufacturing and the economics around the manufacturing because they can procure a settlement. And what do these companies look for? You got to really think in your head, why is Apple building the phones in China? Because they can procure the rare earths. That's a comment, not a criticism. We should be jealous of that and better compete. Speak to the dislocation that Brian talked about. There was a simple incident in the South China Seas in 2011, which is why the prices exploded and the business changed exponentially. 2011 and 12 and 13 is when Wall Street got involved. So you can clearly see there's a trend. People are making more cell phones. People are using more cell phones. Cell phones are going to grow exponentially in the emerging markets. People aren't going to go to an old hardened copper infrastructure. So not only is the trade coming the way of this group, but it's growing exponentially. We're becoming more reliant on technology, not less. This is in general terms the stages of taking a rock and turning it into consumer grade rare earths. And the last stage happens to be how you step it up chemically so that it becomes part of a magnet. Now, who here knows Bose speakers? Anyone ever heard of Bose speakers? Raise your hands. Okay. Isn't it a mystery why they're so small yet they're so powerful? Do you guys remember the speakers when you were younger? How big they were? The difference is the rare earths in the magnets. So when they say earth magnets on a Bose advertisement, they mean rare earth magnets. We don't produce them, right? So the first is, can we process and mine? Can we do separation? Can we do metalling? Can we do the magnets? Just simply in wind, alternative energy, right? The amount of growth is going to be greater than the total consumption today and more than the capacity. So what was a issue, certainly politically and from a defense point of view, is going to become a real economic competition. They who solve this problem win exponentially. Now, politically, we have some really nifty technologies here, right? And one of them happens to be this Joint Strike Fighter, and it's capable of doing all sorts of wonderful things. We've had to get exemptions, and a number of exemptions, so that we can import the rare earth materials to configure this airplane. That's very unusual to get these exemptions, and we've got a lot of them. Now, this has been getting some publicity and some airtime on the news, but you can imagine the paradigm, and how did we get here, where the state-of-the-art defense technology is dependent on someone we're competing with at a number of different levels. And without it, you don't have that. So we can live without the cell phones, as inconvenient as that would be. You can't live without that. Just a sense of weight and measures. If we consume every bit of rare earths that's available, certainly the criticals and heavies for the wind energy, alternative energies, Well, how do you get all the new rare earths for the cars, right? So the Prius. It's 25 pounds of rare earth in each Prius. If you take a look at the end about displays, think of your monitor. Growth is exponential, as Brian said. Supply is incremental. This will be available to take a look at. But this reverse engineers a modern cell phone from what and where the rare earths come from, what's critical, what's heavy. We do believe, though, that the growth is essentially going to be exponential in the third world because most people have cell phones here. Well, we have copper landlines, so everyone's moved to a cell phone. There are places where that doesn't even exist. And think about the new consumption if you can get a modern cell phone. Thorium. All right, so this is an interesting issue. As my favorite Texan once said, this could be the solution of the have and the have more, right? So thorium and rare earths are bundled together, and rare earths are typically bundled with something else. In our case, the properties in Idaho, Montana, and Colorado, we probably have the largest single deposit of thorium, and it's married into the rare earths. But there's an old saying, if you break it, you own it. You guys heard that? If I take the rare earths out, I get thorium. And I now have to run the guns of figuring out what to do with the thorium. But as Brian said, it's a perfectly suitable fuel source. And we should encourage the development of that. I'm sure, I don't want to get ahead of your speech, but we took a different approach. Like I said, the lens we looked through was where are the highest concentrations of heavy and critical rare earths. We understood that they would be the economic drivers. You know, Wall Street has gotten frustrated. Investors have gotten tired. How can we build a platform that's a true platform solution to solving the supply chain issues around rare earth delivery? And there are a number of initiatives, and like I said, it's not a marathon, it's a triathlon. So the three real big sectors are A, you gotta solve the circle that the junior mining companies go into because they can't finance themselves. So they have a tendency of putting more lipstick on a pig. They just keep going back and saying, I'm putting more holes in the ground. You know, give me an A. I don't want a B anymore. I want an A on my report card. That's not the solution. We need to thoroughly understand the consumer side. Grades, percentages of concentrations, who buys the stuff. So if it's all coming from China, China's selling it directly to the consumers. There is no open marketplace. So we have to normalize a free markets trading approach to the supply-demand issue. And then for the first time, we'll understand the data. What's critical? What concentrations? Who buys? What prices are they selling for? That's not a very clear market. Second piece is we need to have enough of a supply to move the needle. Third, we need a place to process this stuff. And if it's not considered a fuel source, then I'm stuck breaking it and now owning thorium. Any questions? Great question, and we're certainly going to get to that. Let me ask you a direct question. So we believe that the exponential growth in the consumption of rare earths, especially the criticals and the heavies, will mean that if I go into full production, I'll barely make enough impact on just that growth, never mind the complete 100% supply. So we're going to complement, not compete with what China is doing, at best. Second point, China is becoming more and more an internal consumer. So if the 130,000 tons that are produced a year, 100 million of those tons go back into China, they never get into the market. So at best, we'll have an incremental positive effect on the broader balance of business. We'll also, in a way, start to develop IP and other things that allow for the supply chain. Third, one of the reasons we have this forum, and these guys are killing themselves, is to figure out how do you not take a perfectly good fuel source and put it back into the ground? If we've gotten the thorium out of the ground and it's in good form for a fuel source, why not make it a material that we can use? That can change the energy needle, which is Brian mentioned about the reactors and stuff like that. So yes, there are issues. We will comply with every issue and be very careful about how we process things. But before we start, we want to understand how to do this in a better, more cooperative way for the United States.
You know, well, Jim is going to start talking first. I'll say one other part of your question, I think, was the processing of rare earths right now is very energy intensive and uses a lot of acids and and comes at a high environmental cost for the cities, these cities that were set up in China to process rare earths. And so there's a very high environmental cost that they've paid, but the process that Jim and I support, the one that for the National Rare Earth Cooperative Act, the rare earth processing facility part of that wouldn't use the same sort of nitric acid centrifuge system. There's newer, cleaner ways to do that. So in that sense, the environmental impact of producing rare earths in this country wouldn't be anything remotely like the high price that's been paid by the cities like Guangzhou and Batao.
Yeah, I agree.